We've talked before many times, in fact, about our admiration for FIRE, which is a group that actually their acronym stands for Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, and it essentially does what the ACLU had previously done, which is defend everybody's free speech rights, regardless of ideology or partisanship or anything else. They're just simply relentless and principled defenders of free speech. We've had many, if not most, of the lawyers with FIRE on our show, and we're delighted to welcome yet another person. We're trying to get the entire group on our show. He's Connor Fitzpatrick, and he's a senior attorney at FIRE. He previously practiced litigation at Miller, Canfield, Paddock, and Stone in Detroit and taught First Amendment law at the University of Detroit Mercy School of Law. He is the lead attorney in FIRE's recently announced suit against Secretary of State Marco Rubio for their immigration policies based in deporting people for their views. And he joins us tonight to discuss that suit and many other related issues. Connor, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. It's great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's talk about this lawsuit. I think FIRE announced it, if I'm not mistaken, on Monday. And it's a lawsuit brought against Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, and the U.S. Department, the U.S. State Department, as a result of these deportation policies against foreign students legally in the United States, Mahmoud Khalil being the example that we just covered, but there are a lot of other ones as well. What's the core argument of the lawsuit?
Right, so we filed suit yesterday against Secretary of State Marco Rubio for really what's been a pattern over the last 5 months of this administration targeting legally present non-citizens in this country for deportation based on protected speech. We've seen, as you mentioned, the administration target Mahmoud Khalil. We've also seen the administration target Ramesia Ozturk and others for bedrock protected speech, like going to a protest or writing an op-ed in a student newspaper. And what Secretary Rubio is doing is he's abusing two provisions in the Immigration and Nationality Act to try and deport people for protected speech. And so we're stepping in and we're challenging these laws on First Amendment grounds, saying that no government of any party should have the ability to throw people out of the country because of their ideas.
Now, there are a lot of people who defend what the Trump administration is doing here. Trust me, I've heard from them for a very long time as we've been covering this case and denouncing what has been being done. And so I just want to go through a couple of their what I guess are their strongest arguments. One of which is, look, Donald Trump campaigned on not only deporting people in the country illegally on a mass scale, but also preventing people from entering our country who might in some way pose a threat, or people who are in the country who in some way pose a threat, just people we don't want here. And the government, no one's entitled to be in the United States, so this region goes. No foreign national has a right to be in the United States, only with the government's consent and permission. Every government has the right to decide who can come into its country or not. And so all this is the government making decisions about which foreign nationals can and can't be in the United States based on who they think is contributing positively. And why do they not have the right to do that?
So a couple of thoughts there. The first, with respect to the idea that they campaigned on the idea of doing what they're doing now, the nice thing about the Constitution is that our rights aren't up for a vote. Popular ideas do not need the government's protection. The First Amendment has always been there to protect the dissenter, those who are expressing in some circles unpopular ideas. So the fact that they ran on violating constitutional rights and won does not mean that they get to violate the Constitution. It simply means that the Constitution needs to be asserted in a federal court, and that's what we're doing now. But to the second part of your question, sort of the idea of who we allow into the country. It is a true statement of the law that the political branches of government traditionally do have a little bit more discretion in deciding who to allow into the United States in the first place. However, what we know, and this is from a Supreme Court case in 1945, what we know is that once you're on our shores, once you're in the United States of America, the First Amendment protects you. And what we mean by that is that the First Amendment prohibits the government from treating you favorably or unfavorably based on whether or not they like what you have to say.
I think one of the confusions that I think is understandable comes from this notion of whether the government can deny certain benefits to people. Meaning, let's say the Trump administration adopted a policy, not that it was going to deport foreign students who were critical of Israel or protested against Israel, which is the policy. But let's assume that they just said, you know what, we don't want any more foreign students in our country. We just don't think it's beneficial for our country. We think they're taking up spots that Americans should take instead. These people are learning from our universities and going back to their countries and giving them the benefits here. We just don't want foreign students, and so we're going to deny all visas, retract all visas to all foreign students, regardless of their political views on anything. Is that something the Trump administration would have the right to do?
So I'll be honest, that's a little bit outside of my bailiwick as a First Amendment attorney. The hypothetical you posited to me certainly has a few things that would be concerning about free that would be concerning to free speech. The idea that we don't like that they're coming here, taking our knowledge and spreading ideas and then going back. But where the First Amendment really kicks in full force is when the government, like the government is doing now, tries to pick and choose people for favorable and unfavorable treatment based on whether the government of the day agrees with the views of the speaker. That's when fire gets involved, and that's when the First Amendment gets involved.
I guess the reason I ask that is, sometimes I think, and again, this is a concept in very fundamental to First Amendment law, but that isn't immediately obvious, which is, let's take the example of, say, unemployment benefits. The government offers unemployment benefits for people who get fired, and they define how much time you get these benefits, what these benefits are. But the government could change that any time. They could pay less. They could shorten the time, or they're not even really required to give unemployment benefits. They could just say, we don't believe in unemployment benefits anymore. There's nothing in the Constitution mandating those. But if the government were to say, everybody's going to get unemployment benefits unless you criticize Donald Trump, and if you criticize Donald Trump, you're going to lose your unemployment benefits, a lot of people I know will say, well, we can give unemployment benefits to anybody we want or take them away at any time. So what's wrong with saying you're not going to get unemployment benefits if you criticize Donald Trump? They're not guaranteed in the first place.
Right. So the problem with that, and why the First Amendment has a very big problem with that, is it is the government differentiating between people based on whether or not the government likes what you have to say. And I'll use sort of an easy example. Think of sort of an entitlement benefit like a Social Security check. That is something that people are entitled to receive under statute. It would not be lawful for Congress to pass a law saying that those individuals who are registered Democrats are going to see a 50% cut in their Social Security check because, well, the government needs to save money. Because that is singling someone out based on their ideology, based on their voting record, and subjecting them to disfavored treatment. So at the point that the government is going to make something available to the general public, it cannot pick and choose who it provides that to on the basis of protected speech.
Another argument that is definitely one that's embraced by a lot of people who support the Trump administration's policy, and it's definitely a widespread belief, and again, I understand why it is. It's not immediately obvious why it's not true, is that, yeah, okay, I'm a full believer in the First Amendment. I want a robust protection of free speech for American citizens. But these people are not American citizens. They're guests in our country, and the Constitution isn't for them. Or even if it is, to some extent, not nearly as much as it applies to American citizens. What's your answer to that?
The Constitution is for everyone who is on the shores of the United States of America. And I'll give you an example. Think about the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal, that we have inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The core truth of America has always been that we don't view rights as a present that we get from the government, from some benevolent king or parliament, that we have liberty because we are human beings, that is why we are inherently free. And so we know, not only from the founding, from the writings of people like Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, but going to the Supreme Court decisions of the 1940s, that the protections of the First Amendment are afforded to non-citizens, because the First Amendment, first and foremost, is a shackle on the government. The First Amendment is not a grant of a right. It is a shackle on the government to abridge speech. So at any point that Congress is trying to legislate in a way that abridges speech, that interferes in the marketplace of ideas to try and push or punish one idea or another, that is what the First Amendment prevents Congress from doing. It puts up a no trespassing sign and says the marketplace of ideas is somewhere that you, Congress, and the executive branch may never trespass upon.
Yeah, and I often tell conservatives who seem inclined to want to support what the Trump administration is doing on the grounds that these are just foreigners, that if you just imagine Joe Biden saying, we're going to deport anybody from our country who criticizes me or says good things about Donald Trump, I think nobody would have trouble understanding why he would be violating the First Amendment. Let me ask about another argument, which I know you're going to confront in this lawsuit, which I think the government is always making. You reference this law and this legal authority on which Marco Rubio is relying, which they interpret as conferring to the State Department the power to deport anybody who in some way is undermining or subverting or impeding U.S. foreign policy. And their argument is central to our foreign policy is that we support and fight with and arm our close ally Israel. We judge that to be in our self-interest. So anybody who comes to our country who's a foreigner and starts agitating against our foreign policy by trying to convince people that Israel is committing genocide or that they are somehow war criminals, these people are agitating against our foreign policy and therefore jeopardizing and undermining our foreign policy, and that gives us justification under this law to deport them.
So that is certainly how countries like China and Russia approach free speech. And I'll give you a direct example. If you look at Article 51 of the Chinese Constitution, it purports to grant Chinese citizens the right to free speech unless it conflicts with the interest of the state. So once you start giving the government the power to restrict speech, so long as the government thinks it's in the best interest of the country to restrict your speech, that is a loophole with infinite diameter. And it is flatly contrary to the American tradition of open and honest debate. And to go back to your earlier example of what if a prior administration had used this, I would imagine that my Republican friends would not have been okay if the Biden administration had decided that any non-citizen espousing the idea that, say, COVID came from a Chinese lab rather than an open air market, we're going to deport them, that opinion is harming our relationship with China. And so anyone who differs from the official line on where COVID came from, we're going to deport you. I would imagine my friends on the right side of the aisle would not be okay with that, and rightly so, because the First Amendment forever takes away the power from the government of subjecting people to punishment, whether it's a jail cell or a deportation flight, because the government doesn't like what they have to say.
Yeah, or you can imagine Biden saying, you know what, we're going to deport every student who supports and praises Israel because our foreign policy is to try to rein Israel in, even though that wasn't, I'm just saying hypothetically. And so we're going to deport anyone who's ever said anything good things about Israel. I think a lot of conservatives would have no problem understanding why that too is an attack on free speech. All right. I've talked about this before, and I think it's true for a lot of people who make free speech one of their central causes. For me, at least, and you're probably too young to have lived through this, so you undoubtedly know about it. One of the things that really shaped my understanding of not just free speech, but just kind of the idea of pursuing principle regardless of party was the ACLU's defense of the American Nazi Party's right to march through Skokie. These were almost entirely Jewish lawyers who were generally on the left. Skokie was a town filled with Holocaust survivors. You can see why they'd be traumatized having people in Nazi uniforms march down the street. A lot of them actually came from concentration camps, and yet the ACLU defended them. And we look back on that now kind of as though it was heroic and principled and noble, at least many people do. But at the time, that case almost destroyed the ACLU. Huge numbers of funders and donors to the ACLU said, no, this is disgusting. This is a cause I cannot support. Now, what's interesting is FIRE, as I first started perceiving it, was most often defending the rights of conservative students on campus against censorship by the administration. At least that was one big part of what FIRE was doing, and it got a lot of support among conservatives. Ever since you also began denouncing censorship attempts against Israel critics or pro-Palestinian voices, which this is not the first time you've done it. There's been many cases. I often see sentiments like this. I think we have a few I saw today in response to your announcement. Do we have these tweets? Okay, it's fine. They're there. They're basically saying, yikes, I'm unfollowing Fire now. I loved Fire when I thought it only went after my political opponents. Didn't realize they actually sincerely believed in free speech as a consistent principle. That was somebody kind of mocking these people who were saying things like, guess I'm done donating to Fire. I'm glad now that I never gave Fire any money. They used to be fairly conservative. Now they're supporting Hamas. WTF, free speech for citizens only. Fire has become a waste. Fire is a joke of an organization. All tweets below your announcement about this lawsuit. Have you experienced a lot of pushback from previous supporters who, as that first tweet said, are now realizing that you actually took seriously the principle of free speech and weren't just there to defend it in the case of conservatives whose free speech was being attacked?
So our true supporters, the ones who support free speech, have been very much on our side. Occasionally, we'll get some supporters who might have seen one case or another that we're defending possibly a view that they're a little bit more in concert with, and they think that we're an organization that just defends causes that they like. And so when we file a lawsuit that defends a cause or a speaker that they don't like as much, they say, well, I never knew Fire would have done this. Of course, had they visited our website, which I encourage everyone to do, thefire.org, they would see our consistent, principled, nonpartisan defense of free speech. Now, here's the thing, Glenn. Free speech is hard. Free speech requires not only listening to and tolerating, but defending the rights of people to speak whose views you might find absolutely abhorrent. But the only alternative to free speech is allowing the government to decide which views they are going to allow us to hear, whether it's from a non-citizen who might be visiting one of our universities or just here vacationing at Disneyland, or whether it's a university lecturer. We would have to cede power to the government to decide which views and which people's views we are allowed to hear. And we are far safer, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Green, or anything in between. You are far better leaving that up to yourself to decide which views you want to hear, which views you want to agree with, than handing that authority over to some government bureaucrat.
Yeah, it's very well said, and it obviously comes from a lot of thinking from somebody who has devoted themselves to a defense of the First Amendment and free speech. I really appreciate the work Fire does in general. I think this lawsuit in particular is very important. We'll continue to follow it. We'd love to have you back on as there are more developments, and we appreciate your coming on tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a good evening. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.